Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Welcome to the Partner's Perspective.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Listeners are probably wondering who you are.
That's a very good question. So my name's Liz Wright. I work for RSM as a partner, and I work in the risk assurance practice, specialising in internal audit in co-source and outsource for health and charity sectors.
Oh, so
which
well
is like
put.
the longest introduction ever. I do audit is basically the short answer to that.
I love that. Liz, I've known you for a while, haven't I?
Indeed, yes. Yeah,
so excited to have you on here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So background on me and Liz, done some recruitment for you in the past, haven't I?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
We've done women leadership events together.
More importantly, yeah, absolutely.
She's also a TEDx speaker, guys.
Many years ago,
Definitely going to put that out there for you.
Gotta love a TED Talk, yeah.
But no, I wanted you on here because you have a lot to offer. You have a lot to say.
I do have a lot to say. Probably
and
too
I love
much
working
sometimes.
with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, very excited. Liz, I'm going to jump straight into it.
Go for it.
Partner. RSM background.
Yeah. So, yeah, a bit of a checkered career history. So, unlike most people, I didn't dream of being an auditor as a small child. Wasn't one of those careers I kind of really wanted to do.
Didn't dream of it, no?
Didn't dream of it, no. Very surprising, although coming from a family of accountants. But so I did English at university, and then kind of got to the end of my second year. Wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Knew I didn't want to do teaching. Didn't really think I could be a writer, so I decided that I'd never met a poor accountant. So what I would do is go join a firm, do my training contract while I worked out what I wanted to do with my life. 20 years later, I'm still working out what I want to do with my life. So I started with a firm called Bentley Jennison, which eventually became part of RSM, and I started in external audit actually.
Oh, why did I not know that? I always thought you were IA.
No, well, I was so I did external audit for the first 18 months, as a lot of people do, and actually failed my ACA exams. It wasn't for me. I found it, having done English, it was such a departure from what I'd done before. And also I found, and no offence to any external auditors, but I found the slightly repetitive nature of basically you'd be doing the same things at different clients, and it was just a bit repetitive. So around that time, luckily, one of the partners in the firm suggested I tried internal audit, so I made the transfer, and then that for me flew because I'm nosy, I like to talk to people, I like different stuff, and internal audit's just kind of perfect for that. So I spent sort of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years working my way up through internal audit. Then I went to work for a client for a year. So I wanted to see what industry was like, and then came back. And then I spent another 5 years or so and got to senior manager or AD level. And then I went to work in industry for about 5 years. So I went to work for Home Retail Group, who owned Argos and Homebase at the time. And that was really nice to see it from a different perspective and to spend time in-house. And then when I was there, I joined their commercial development team, which was using all the skills of audit, but at the front end of a process. So, what new lines should they invest in? What new markets should they go into? So it was very much more a development role. And I think that's what's great about audit, and particularly internal audit, is your skills are so transferable because it's all about just analysing but also talking to people, and I think it's such a beautiful kind of combination. So I think for people who are trying to work out what they want to do with their careers, I just think it's such a good grounding, because the rooms you will be in, like, as a relatively junior person, you're talking to CEOs, you're talking to board members, you're kind of getting that C-suite, which you just won't get in other kind of areas. And then about 8 years ago, I rejoined RSM. So I'd spent some time in a mental health charity after leaving Argos. And then about 8 years, I returned as a director at RSM, and then 3 years ago made partner. So I've done 5 years as director now, 3 years as partner. So a bit of a kind of wavy road, but I think they're more interesting.
They are.
And I think spending time in and out of industry and in and out of practice is like really, really useful for me.
Yeah, you're right, isn't it? It's completely two different sides, two very different industries, all with an audit. Typical route, you're right, is external audit, do your qualification and then move out to industry. But you're right, you just said something so important that I tell candidates to do, is I think there's a bit of fatigue or a bit more, repetitive work when you are in external audit. So people do tend to, go into industry in-house to do that. But often what I hear is it's holistic, and there's so many pros to that. It's a really good exposure to get that learning for a whole business and see that entire risk assurance or audit plan. But often people do come back in.
Absolutely. And I think, career paths aren't linear, are they? And, when I first started out 20 years ago, it was seen as quite as negative if you jumped or, left, firms or roles in less than 3 years, whereas now it's really commonplace. And I think, it's good to gain that breadth of experience. And also, there are times in your career when you want to lean in and you want to really go, all guns blazing, and then there are other times where perhaps you just need a bit of a different pace or a different kind of environment, and so I found that, you know, there's been different times, and I think what I missed about practice was just the variety and if I'm being honest, the pace, and I think there's nothing quite like practice to test you at that level, but doing that consistently can be a bit relentless, and sometimes you might need to just think about doing things in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because when I speak to people, they're like, oh, you know, I've been, the biggest pushback that I get on the market from candidates is, oh, I've been in external audit, I know what that's like, I'm not going back to that. But what would you say the difference is doing external audit in practice versus internal audit? If you can talk about that as a partner, that would be amazing, because that's the biggest thing I get questioned on. Yeah,
and I think it, you know, it probably varies from team to team and firm to firm, but in RSM, the workflow is different in internal audit. So we tend to have large clients who agree a big annual plan with us, but that work is consistent across the year.
Yeah.
So we don't have those peaks and troughs of we've got, you know, we all have deadlines to hit, but we don't necessarily have that pressure of we need to file at a certain date and we need to get these things done. So we spread our work more evenly. So you know, I don't expect my teams to be working significant amount of extra hours or weekend working and those types of things, because we can manage the workflow. Of course, there are busy times and less busy times. We're coming up to the end of September to March is generally busier for us. That's because a lot of our clients are March year ends, and also it's what we call the tender season. So it's also where we're winning work. So those two factors make it it's a bit busier. I also think the winter always makes you feel worse, doesn't it? Like it's dark, it's cold, it's wet.
I hate January.
Exactly. It's horrible, isn't it? So I fully leaned into January this year.
Did you?
Yeah, I fully embraced the wintering concept, which is just basically like, it's almost like the anti-diet where you're like, no, I'm having mash, I'm having the stews, I'm not leaving my house. Like, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. I think it was like, I think what we do throughout the winter is put our pressure on ourselves to be exactly like we are in the summer and be really social and be out there and stuff, and you just don't want to. So this January, and I also went on a retreat which was gorgeous, and I think sometimes just cocooning yourself away is like the way to deal with January, rather than going full into New Year's resolutions and being quite hard on yourselves. I think we give up a lot of things in January, don't we? We often give up drinking or going out or
sugar,
money or whatever, and it's just like sugar.
Don't do it, guys.
I'm already on the Easter eggs. So I feel like we should be a bit kinder to ourselves. So I think sometimes the work can feel different in the winter than it does in the summer, just because of all the added pressures of coming to work in the dark and going home in the dark and all those types of things.
It's true as well, and the days are they're shorter. So short. I mean, I definitely suffer from SAD syndrome. It's a thing.
It's such a real thing. Yeah. Like my husband really does as well, and so like if I could make it mandatory for all my team to go for a walk at lunchtime, I would. It's not allowed, but because I think they need to get you need to get that vitamin D, and you need to get that at lunchtime because it's not going to be around otherwise. And also like the Lumi lamps and those we've got those in the house now. They're really good for like just giving you that kind of vitamin D boost. But I do think in this country, we're obsessed with the weather, but equally we just like to ignore it. Whereas you look at some other countries and they really lean in, don't they? Like Scandi, really lean into that and kind of make the most of it.
Iceland, they don't. Is that the part where there's no daylight?
At certain points of the year, they will have very little daylight. Yeah. So I went to Lapland a few years ago with my husband, and we went on a husky ride, and he was like, oh, this would be great to do in the daytime. And I was like, it's 2:00, babe. This is the daytime. This is as light as it gets. So, that was probably the weirdest when we were in the Arctic Circle. Like, literally no daylight. So. Yeah.
And I'm not great with cold either.
Oh, I love a bit of cold.
Do you? Yeah, To be fair, I like cold in December because you've got like the run up to, so in our culture, we celebrate Diwali. We've got the run up to that. Then it's Christmas. It gets to 26th of January and I'm like, I'm done now. So I really struggle in January, to be fair.
There's not a lot to look forward to, is there? And I think like that's the thing, you have to try and make those things to look forward to, don't you?
Absolutely. It's interesting you said you'd mandate your team if you could.
If I could, I just think we have a tendency to hunch over our desks all day, don't we? And kind of sit there in one place and not move. And I think, the pandemic for a lot of us, the step count was just crazy, wasn't it? Like how little,
just kept going,
little steps you were doing compared to like before. And I think it's really important to have that break in the day. And I also think people work better because I think, obviously depending if I had my ideal day, I'd like to do deep work in the morning, not really do meetings, and then do the meetings in the afternoon. But I'd like to take quite a big break in the middle of the day and actually kind of recharge my batteries. And I think we particularly kind of in our industry, we almost kind of think we should be able to work like a robot for 12-14 hours a day and not have any variation, whereas I think as I've got older and kind of read a bit more about it, I definitely think we should view like 4-hour blocks or whatever, and like
Interesting.
and not just say, you know, working through lunch I think is kind of the worst thing we can do. I know why we do it, but
I do
sometimes
it.
it's the
I'm
worst.
terrible for it, Liz.
Oh,
I would
should be.
definitely be that team member that you'd be like, go
Having
for
a
walk.
sandwich over your desk, like a really
Yeah.
sad thing. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I think
I also hate sandwiches. I really like.
oh yeah, I think sandwiches are like a very sad
They're so
indictment of
grim.
British society as well. So yeah.
You can get some good ones. No, really interesting point you make. I think it's productivity is really important, and if you can't be productive, you're right. You can't be productive for that amount of time without getting a good break or intervals.
Recharging your batteries, isn't it? So
Yeah.
there's a new book out by Ali Abdaal called Feel Good Productivity, which is all about that. It's like trying to harness productivity, but not for productivity's sake, and to make it feel good, and to kind of really lean into that, because I think, you know, we always have. It's really hard, isn't it? Like at RSM, we bill every 5 minutes of our time. So like the obsession is there to like obviously fill your work with chargeable time. But what we have to also remember is it has to be quality. And like,
absolutely.
I think I've got to the stage now where I can recognise I'm not being very efficient right now. I would be better to go for a walk and come back and smash this out in 20 minutes than sit here for an hour and a half trying to do something when mine's not really in its kind of optimum state. So I think that's also important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing with that as well is you've been working, you know, for a long time. You've been in this industry for a long time. She looks great. You look great.
You look way too young, but yeah.
You know your body and you know yourself.
Yeah.
What advice is, you know, what kind of advice would you give to your younger self? Because you know now, actually, I'm not at my best here. I'm going to walk away from this. And I'm probably at that point where I'm like, I'm just not doing anything here. I'm going to go and do something different and then come back and tackle this later. But when I was younger, I never knew that.
Yeah.
I just kept going. Was it quality? Was it productive? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is an art, isn't it? And I think there's lots of things you learn about yourself, and as you get older, around preferences and ways of working. You know, if I'm learning, I need to read it. I can't take it in through audio. Other people are completely different. Some people are really visual, aren't they? So I think as you get to nuance some of those things, like you'll understand it. And also don't be afraid to try and make adjustments that are going to work for you.
Yeah.
So I think, it's all part of knowing. I think it's also really tough when you're early on in your career, because up until that point, you know, generally speaking, you probably would have gone to sixth form or A levels, you probably would have done university, and you're used to just having to study, and nothing else really is that important. Whereas when you get into your first few years, you're having to work harder than you've ever worked before, taking on more information than you've ever taken on before, and you've got the expectations of doing a role, but then you've also got to study for your professional quals on top. And I think
it's tough.
going back to when I failed ACA, I underestimated, you know, I'd always aced exams, I'd always been bright, I just didn't think it would be like that difficult, and it was such a steep learning curve for me in terms of like how hard those exams were. So I always say to like our grads or people who are joining the business, like, don't underestimate how difficult that bit is, because I see it a lot. It's like really difficult to balance study, work, and then everything we're talking about in terms of recharging your batteries and doing that. And I think definitely studying is where I hear from some of my team that not knowing, like, an hour's worth of really good study is better than 3 hours just sitting there mindlessly flicking through stuff.
So true. You take in more as well, don't you?
Absolutely. And again, like, finding the right time for you. So like I would prefer to do that at weekends rather than not do it at all during the week. Some people like to get up early and do it. Like, again, like, work out your preference around that. But I think don't underestimate how tough those first few years are in terms of getting to grips with everything.
So true. I mean, you're adjusting to, you know, especially if you're in a professional services firm, especially if it is external audit or even internal audit, you know, it's sometimes we are so committed to work. It's not easy. And genuinely, I always say to candidates, you know, I spoke to a candidate today and they were saying, I just passed my ACA last week. And I was like, congrats, hats off to you. Because genuinely, if I'd had to do an exam, any sort of exam, I'd crumble. I wouldn't do it.
Well, especially when the pressure is you've got to do exam and we may well fail you out the business if you don't pass that exam. Like, that's a double whammy, isn't it?
That's a different level of pressure,
That is
isn't
a different level of pressure. So I think, you know, I always say to grads, it's like a marathon, not a sprint. So don't, you know, we get a lot of... I always blame the apprentice, but like, you get a lot of people early on, either in assessment centres or in the first few weeks or months of work, who are really trying to like impress, which is fantastic. That's a great motivation. But you have to be careful how you do it, because you've got to be able to sustain that. And I've seen a lot of people essentially kind of burn bright, but not for very long, because they didn't realise that, okay, a training contract is 3 years for a reason, and it's going to take you that long to qualify. And sometimes, more often than not, it takes longer than that, because you may well have a setback or an exam fail or whatever. So, you know, you've got to manage your energy in a way that you've again, not really had to do before, because it's always been quite short sprints of get through your A levels, get through your first year, second year, third year, whatever, find a role. So I think you have to kind of view it as a slightly more long-term project.
Absolutely. And I think also what COVID taught us is things are out of our control.
Absolutely.
So what happened? Exams weren't going ahead. They couldn't do that.
Yeah.
That would have taken longer.
And as a control freak, I absolutely hated the fact that it was out of control. But you're right, it's, lots of things happen, and it's not as you envisage it. Again, a bit like when I started, I just assumed I'd be able to do ACA because I would put my mind to it, and it turns out it wasn't the skill set. But I'm a big believer in, what doesn't work for you is the universe kind of redirecting you towards something better, or something that's more suited to you. And so I think definitely, if anyone's going through that exam failure process, don't take it as a massive rejection. Just take it as something to learn from and to do better.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. You've been at RSM for
almost 8 years. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly. And I think for me it's been exactly the right place in terms of and I'm sure we'll come on to it, but some of the things I'm most passionate about are about equality and diversity and inclusion. For lots of my career, I walked into rooms where I might be the only woman, or I might be a younger woman, like the age gaps, or certainly a minority. And I think, one of the things I've really enjoyed about working at RSM is the ability to use the networks and stuff that the firm has to offer, but also to bring my own voice to the party. And, they've been very good in taking on ideas and taking on programmes and schemes that we've thought about. So one instance is our Reactivate programme, which is something we launched a couple of years ago, because up until that point in internal audit, you either came in as a grad or you came in as an experienced hire, and there was nothing in between. And Reactivate is essentially aimed at career changes, so people who perhaps have done another job, and we've had police officers, we've had teachers, we've had radiographers, we've had everything, hospitality, retail, people who got to a certain point and realised that they wanted to make a change. So they've been able to come in under the Reactivate programme and essentially get the training they would get as a grad, but a slightly more relaxed pace because of all the pressure we've just talked about.
Of course.
And also, if you have a mortgage, the idea of being exam failed is very daunting. So we have different workarounds around that. But what it's allowed us to do is bring in a really diverse workforce, not just in terms of ethnicity and gender, but also social mobility, which is a real thing for me. I'm a girl who went to a comprehensive, I didn't go to private school. I didn't have that network. And social mobility for me is absolutely about escalating talent throughout the business. And some of those have been our real success stories, fantastic with clients, really enjoy the opportunity, and it's a different layer from the grads. So that's an example of how RSM has kind of I put forward an idea and they've absolutely allowed me to run with it.
I love that. That's a brilliant initiative, isn't it? Because like you said, diversity is really important. You've also got people coming from different backgrounds. I didn't know that was a thing. That's a brilliant thing.
Exactly. And also, not everyone peaks at 18, do they? So
true.
So if you didn't, if school perhaps was, everyone's not academic, are they? Like talk about my husband, but like my husband's the brightest man I've ever met, but he has no qualifications, and school was not for him. He came from an immigrant family. His mother didn't read or write English, and the school system never really got his potential. And so I always like to think it's for people who perhaps didn't hit their peak at 16 or 18 and whatever. And also the fact that there is more than one way to have a career these days, and you don't have to. Again, I didn't dream of being an auditor. You don't know about these things when you're 18 necessarily, do you? True. And so, it's been great for lots of people who are kind of slightly later on in their careers to kind of have an opportunity to get into professional services and bring their skill set as well. They've brought as much to the business as we've been able to give to them, which has been fantastic.
I think I really resonate with that, because you're right. When I was in school, would I have known about Big Four audit? I didn't even know what all that was. I didn't even know who the Big Four were.
Exactly.
And when I started doing this, when I came into recruitment, I had to learn about audit. What is that? What kind of qualifications people have? But I also had to learn about recruitment. I didn't even know recruitment was something I could go into, and it's a very lucrative,
recruitment is such a good social mobility, isn't it? Because you can come there's very low barriers to entry, but anyone can be really, well, if you work hard and you have the right skill set, but you can be successful at it. And I think we need more careers like that that are talked about at schools. So one of the things that I'm part of is like business women groups, and we're talking about actually at school, does anyone ever tell you about being a business owner? No. Running your own business. And there were probably people around you in your community, the plumber, the hairdresser, the whatever, but they were never held up as like business heroes. Or taught that that's your career path. So, obviously I left school 25 years ago. I'm sure the world's very different, but, it was very much then it was go to university, get a profession. of one of these 5 things, which was like teacher, doctor,
Doctor,
lawyer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Accountant, whatever. And even, sorry, I'm flip-flapping all over the place, but even now, like, I think with accountancy, so I did go to a comp. I took 2 years out before I went to university and did my English degree. But I don't think I would go to university now because I don't think that the debt that I would incur would be worth it.
Ridiculous.
And I think if you're thinking about accounting as your career, then I think absolutely join a school leaver program because you'll be qualified quicker, you'll have more experience, and you'll have no debt. And I just think it's we got apprenticeships and stuff now, and it's a very different career. Really career path, because I just think incurring 75 grand's worth of debt. Yeah. It's just horrific.
Yeah, and people are paying that off. I'm lucky. Yeah. I paid mine off 2 years ago, and it was a real sense of achievement. Genuinely, like I was like, oh my god, I've not got that going out my salary now. This is brilliant.
The best part of a decade. Yeah, exactly.
At least, but you're right. Would I? The only reason I went to uni, and I say this quite openly on another podcast, I said my mum wanted me to go. My mum was like, you're my third child. The other two haven't gone. You must go. You must go, please. So I kind of went, and I was supposed to be a teacher. Thank God I wasn't. I don't think I have the patience for it. Absolute credit to teachers, because I think they do an amazing job. It is such a hard job. But would I want that debt now? Because if you go down the apprenticeship route, or getting to work quicker, you get that experience. So you can start working your way up quicker.
Absolutely. And we have lots of examples in our firm of people who did that. Our CEO is someone who joined from a school as a school leaver.
Amazing.
And didn't go to university. So again, RSM is great for that kind of. There's lots of different ways to crack an egg almost, and there's lots of different career paths. But I fully agree. I think, unless you're really sure about why you want to go to university and there's a good reason, and maybe family expectations are a really good reason, totally. I know that there's definitely expectation in my family that you would go to university, because my parents have both been the first of their families to go, and it was really important to them. My dad did meet my mum at university as her lecturer, but we'll gloss over that. But
I've got to hear more about
that. Exactly.
But
I think you like most things in life, but I graduated but I'd worked full time through university. Yeah. So although I did my degree, I worked full time, and that's because I had to support myself, and I'd kind of met my husband already. But what that allowed me to do was save my student loan and buy my first house 6 months out of uni. Yeah. Whereas now, like,
smart. That's it. Well, smart.
It was lucky rather than smart. I don't pretend that I knew what I was doing, but I think the difference is with like a lot of my team, they're in their mid to late 20s and still at home because they cannot afford to get on the property ladder. And again, that's a very different situation. They are earning good money as qualified auditors, but they can't afford to make that leap onto the housing ladder.
Everything's gone up though. Costs have gone up, and this is where I was talking to my husband again. I completely agree. He's we say these things at home, and I was like, you're either book smart or actually street smart. Yeah. And I'm definitely the one that's book smart. I don't have amazing like grades out there, but I'm definitely, if you're comparing us two, I'm the one that's a goody two shoes and do everything by the book. And I'm like, I studied, I did everything, I did my exams, and I went to uni, and he didn't do that, but he is so switched on. He knows really good things about investments, and I lack in that area. I wish they taught me, and I said this earlier to you, didn't I?
Absolutely.
Investments, mortgages, how to invest in shares and stuff. I wish I knew that.
Absolutely. And I think, like, for instance, just taking the pension match that your company will provide you. I agree. Like, I think, and we were talking about this because I think it's a real area. I'm now at that point where I've kind of got the next 20 years. I've done 20 years. I've got another 20 years. And I'm now thinking, like, what's next? What does the next, like, stage of my career look like? And I definitely think financial education is a massive part of what I want to be contributing to, because I feel like, particularly for female voices, we weren't taught many of these things, and it's not to say that the boys were either, but we just weren't. I don't know, like my mum got married in 1976. It wasn't until 1977 in this country you could have a bank account without a man signing for you. It could be your father or your husband. They weren't fussy, but it had to have a man's signature on it. And so, our mothers come from a very different money mindset. Like, my mum had a job, but she didn't have a career. Yeah. And so, like, when I talk to a lot of women, it's that difficulty in navigating. How do you ask for a pay rise? How do you ask for a bonus? Yeah. How do you know that's fair? Like, how do you sort of negotiate for yourself? And obviously in recruitment you must see this all the time in terms of expectations.
I'm good at asking for money.
Oh yeah, me too. I am now, but I didn't for many years, and true. I actually undersold myself, I'm sure. Yeah. And I think one of the, and not just in professional services, but I see it in business all the time, but like the difference between people who are successful and people who are uber successful, it's just sometimes they back themselves a bit more. They are no more
Confident.
talented, they are no more capable, competent, whatever, but they just back themselves. And I feel like if we had more people who could do that, particularly women, we'd be in a much better place.
I think you said so many things there that, one, I was about to go on a rant and I was like, what? You couldn't get a bank account?
Yeah, in this country.
Without
a man
without
signing
your father's consent or your
husband's. Yeah, they weren't fussy, but yeah, either or. But yeah, like that's within
very
our
annoying.
Very annoying. So that's within our mother, you know, like my mother's life, my mother's lifetime. You know, like going back a generation before that, my grandmother had to leave school at 14 to support her younger brothers and sisters because she lived in a really poor area of Liverpool. So you know, I'm very grateful for the opportunities I have, and these are first world problems, but I still think we need to do better.
100%. You know, funny thing, whilst we're on this topic, I actually told my CEO, I was like, you know what, you know, culturally women had to hand in their wage packet. Not for every family, this is not a general thing in my culture, but my mum handed in her wage packet when she was married. So whatever she earned, she had to give that in to her father-in-law, and then she would be given spending money in return. If somebody asked me to do that now, I'd have plenty to say, but that was the norm. But also I was talking to my sister on our parents, or, you know, on their background and what they went through. They didn't have the opportunity because they didn't have a job. They were at home.
Right.
They probably didn't have that confidence, or don't get that confidence, because we've not always worked, right? Women haven't always worked. They've never really had to put themselves out there. I think it's, you know, something that's more apparent now. But the first thing I think women do is doubt. We doubt ourselves. We're not risk takers, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, so many things of what you're saying are so true. And so the reasons one of this is passionate. I did a master's in leadership and management, focusing on the impact of women leadership on accounting firms. And I wanted to do this gorgeous piece of research which says, the more female leaders you have, you know, the better the firms perform financially and whatever. And actually, the research was there was more CEOs called John than there were women, and I couldn't do sufficient enough research because there weren't enough at that time, which is about 5 years ago. There weren't enough female leaders in accounting firms, and that's just one example of how it's still, you know, still biased. And you're right, you know, women's financial education is often about saving, and it's about making ends meet, making. If you read an article aimed at females, it's often around saving money or shopping wisely or best buys, whereas men, it will be investments and it will be how to grow your money, and it's that leverage point that gives you. I never wanted, I've always being fiercely independent. I never wanted to rely on my partner for my financial security, because I saw lots of women around me who did that and either didn't have options or it narrowed their abilities. But you're right about the confidence thing, and again, you must see this in recruitment, but research says that women want to have 90% or more of the qualities on a job description. Men, it's 60%, and they're much more likely to take a risk and take a gamble. And I'm guessing, and I'd love to hear what your experience is of women negotiating for pay, like on appointment, if women are less likely to negotiate pay.
Do you know what? And two things there. One, yes, I completely agree. In 8 years of doing this, males will always tend to ask, can you get me a bit more? Can you get me? And sometimes I've had to say, genuinely, I can't. It's in my interest. I'm a recruiter.
You want
it's in my interest to get you as much money as I can. And there are some punchy numbers. And I think when I speak to females, again, not every single one. This is very, generic. Generic. I spoke to someone today. Actually, there was a situation today. I think she undersold herself. She was like, I want X amount. And I was like, actually, I think you could get like $5,000 more than that. It's really, it's a real thing. And I think it all goes back to what you said earlier. Backing yourself.
And also, much of, again, talking about like Western society, but, much of what you're taught as a woman is to keep yourself small, don't offend anyone, don't
say yes,
don't say yes, exactly, don't say no. Absolutely, just be grateful for what you're given, and don't get above your station. Thankfully that's changing, and I see certainly different behaviours coming through in younger females in my team, but there is still very much that legacy. And again, kind of research shows us that a woman in a room, a man in a room full of women, his biggest fear is being laughed at. A woman in a room full of men, her fear on some level is about being killed or hurt. And it's like, until we start really ingratiating some of those or undoing some of those really long held beliefs, as a woman you are much less likely to stick up for yourself and or stick out because you're worried about the repercussions.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I spoke to somebody called Antoinette Dale Henderson about this. She came on the Two Who Recruit, and I was saying we have to as business leaders think about the cultural differences here. We have a lot more people who are coming to the UK who are being sponsored because there's a shortage in the audit market. With that, we have to consider those cultural differences, because in certain cultures, I've said this openly and I stand by it, and I genuinely believe this. It goes back, and you said this earlier as well, we are not taught to say no. We are not taught to disagree. That's frowned upon. And I think when it comes to that, it also depends on one, culture and family and what you're taught. To you have to be pushed. You have to, you need supportive people who say, ask that question. Push yourself. And I'm very lucky personally, where my partner says to me, I need you to disagree. I want you to tell me if you don't agree with me, because you need to have a voice. You need to back yourself. I think it takes that kind of encouragement and the network you are around to be able to do that, for you to actually flourish and push that through. It's the support network, isn't it? Because it's a big thing, Liz. It's
Absolutely.
a massive thing to do.
And it's about, it depends, whatever your cultural background, but how deferential you've been taught to be. And that may be for many reasons, but it does come from that deference, doesn't it? But also I think, we can go on about the media and how different women. So actually, why I love Dragon's Den, because you see women being very direct and strategic.
Yes.
And having those negotiations, which you probably don't see. So going back to our earlier conversation, you probably weren't raised in, I wasn't raised in where I saw women negotiate for more money. That wasn't a thing I ever saw or heard. I didn't know many women who worked or had careers anyway. So it's, again, you have to see it to be it, don't you? And I think that's what's great about people like Cody Sanchez, on YouTube, and it's just that real insight that you don't get. Every day, and then you need to see more role models of it, and practical steps of actually how do I ask for a pay rise without coming off like an idiot? How do I negotiate on my way? It's much easier to, for instance, you learn it's much easier to negotiate on the way in than it is at any other point in your career.
Absolutely, do it right at the beginning. Because after that, it's hard.
Exactly.
That's what I always
exactly, and it's easier to move and get money often than it is or whatever. So but those things you need someone to tell you, don't you? Or you have to spend 10 years working out and then work out that you've probably been leaving money on the table.
I'll put you on the spot here. Have you ever asked for a promotion yourself?
I haven't, but I think, if going back to what advice would I give myself, I think earlier on, back myself. And also, I quote this book a lot, so apologies if people have heard me say this before, but it's a book called The Unfair Advantage by Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba.
Yes, I think you told me about this. Yeah, we spoke about it.
Such a great book. But often the things that I thought held me back, by being the only woman in the room or by having a different viewpoint or whatever, were actually my superpowers. And I think if you can understand that earlier on in your career, that actually the things you think that make you different from everyone else are actually your advantages. I think had I gone back, there was 1 year I remember not getting a pay rise, and I was upset about it, and I raised it, but it didn't change. And I think had I had a different toolbox, I might have gone after that conversation slightly differently. And I might have asked to see how many of my male colleagues didn't get a pay rise or whatever. I'm not saying it was based on gender, but I think I would definitely now be a little bit more direct about...
It's asking the question, isn't it?
It's asking the questions.
It's going out there and just calling out maybe the obvious, or maybe at least you can ask. So it might be a completely different thing. Like you said, it might not be about gender, but at least you asked. And I do so much. Yeah,
exactly.
It's really easy to sort of sit 5 years on or 10 years on to say I should have done that. And I think this is why exactly I wanted you on this podcast, is what advice would you give to those who are wanting that promotion, wanting extra money?
So I think always just have those conversations, and as you say, understand what are the things I need to do or show to get you to this point. So Ramit Sethi, who wrote I Will Teach You to Be Rich, has a really good thing, which is basically you almost need to start these conversations 3 or 6 months before you want it to happen. And you need to have that open dialogue with whoever the decision maker is, which often isn't your direct boss. You think it would be, but it's not. Particularly in firms where there's layers of hierarchy and layers of different decision makers. So find out actually who is the decision maker and have a conversation with them about exactly what they need to see from you to do that. Because I think often, again, talking about male-female differences, because that's kind of what I'm most familiar with. But women think, that they have to fulfill every single item
Yeah.
to get the promotion, whereas men will be a bit more like, I've done this and this, that's enough.
Yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. I can do it.
Yeah.
And there's research to show that actually men often get promoted for potential, whereas women have to evidence that they've done it,
Yeah.
which is something that we
Interesting.
need to work on. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, but have those conversations. Like, what are actually the things you need from me to get that promotion or pay rise? And it may be that actually the things you think are important are completely not, and vice versa. But at least then you've had that conversation. And I think regularly then going back to it in your one-to-ones and be like, am I still on track for this?
Yes.
What would stop me from getting this? What isn't going to get this? So that you're setting out that expectation of I'm expecting to get to here.
Yeah.
But you're giving your boss plenty, or whoever the decision maker is, plenty of elements in between to say, actually, this isn't quite up to scratch, or you need to work on this or this and this, or you need to achieve X.
Really good point. I mean, I have this tip. Where, you know, I always used to sit down with my boss, and I used to review in December how my year went, what had I achieved, what do I think I can improve on for the next year, and what he thinks on that. And that's how I've done it. I'm very much this planner, which I always talk about. The audience is probably sick of me saying this, but it all goes back to planning. If you know, like you said, 3 to 6 months before you want it to happen, which means you need to put a thought process in. You need to plan what conversations you're having, how you're having that, and also what are your expectations, so they can be aware. Because if you're way off and if you're not aligned, that conversation needs to happen quite quick.
Absolutely. And I've definitely had conversations with team members who've been like, oh, I'm smashing it. And we're like, actually, you're really
way
not.
off.
Like, yeah, exactly. You're really not. And actually, I don't know, and whatever. But that's quite a good conversation to have, that, again, early on, you need to, I'm really keen on feedback for the teams, and really keen on those regular touch-ins about how you're doing. Because particularly when you're earlier on, you don't always know. And also, if you're in a role where there's no comparison, like, when you're in your first, second, third years, you're in cohorts. It's quite easy to see who's doing really well and who's not. But then as you get further on in your career, it's much more difficult to understand that. And also, it's not necessarily even how you're performing, but it's like, what does the job need from you? Yeah. And it may be that so recently we've had a team member, and we've explained to get to the next stage, it's going to be taking on business development. And they've gone, well, that's not what I want to do. And we've said, well, that's what that role is. This role over here will be something different, and that might be something you want to think about. But they had they wanted to get to a certain job, and it was like, well, but in order to do that job, you're going to have to do all these things. And if you don't want to do the job, I think often, going back to advice, I think I would have told myself to not necessarily chase job promotions for the title or for the money, but seek out the roles that are best suited to what I find easy and my skill set, because you will always do better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing about professional services firms as well is, I know, when I speak to candidates, they're like, oh, I don't like business development. I'm like, but when you get there, that's a requirement. You got to go out and sell the business. There's cross-selling. That's just one of the things of how professional services works, right?
Exactly.
It's and I think going back to your earlier point about, males doing a tick list thing, it happens with job specs.
Yeah, I can
when I
imagine.
send a job spec out, they'll be like, okay, got 60%, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, when I speak to females, they're like, go through it. And
I've got one thing on here. Yeah, exactly.
Haven't done this one. Can I apply for that? No, I can't apply for that. And I'm like, absolutely, yes, you can. Just because it's on a job spec. A job spec never tells you, candidates, a job spec will never tell you what the hiring manager is looking for. And this is why I always say I will never recruit for somebody off a job spec.
Right.
I actually have a lot of people that I speak to, and they're like, oh, we just need this. We just need an external auditor, or we just need an internal auditor with an ACA, or, whatever it is. I just need them to do that for a bit. And it's like, no, but what that actually is, and what the hiring manager thinks and wants, softer skills in the business. What are the gaps?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you need this person to? It's a whole different brief when you actually get on the phone. So it's interesting, isn't it? That
so interesting. And one of the things I learned in industry, which Argos did really well, was they did personality testing, but they used it to fill gaps in the team. They didn't want everyone to be the same. They wanted teams to have a balanced skill set. And I think you're right, often in professional services, we're like cookie cutter, as long as they tick these boxes. Whereas actually, I think if we looked more at what makes balanced and high performing teams, it is that diversity of thought. And we really need to kind of be recruiting for that as well. Yeah,
it's so true. I mean, I often thought I had to be like someone else, or in the business, or someone else might need to be me. Like, you have different skill sets, and it's how can you utilize that team. A team can't be a team if they're all the same and they have the same things and the same strengths. That's not how business survives. You need someone who can think outside the box. You need someone who comes up with different ideas.
You need someone who's going to get it done. You need someone who's going to tick the boxes. Like, absolutely, you need all of those skills.
Yeah, and that I spoke about this. I don't know. We did a event many years ago with Matthew Saeed.
Okay. Yeah.
And he one of the best presentations I've genuinely to this day I've ever been to. He had nothing on the screen, literally no PowerPoint. He was talking to the
Just
audience.
held the room.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that he said was cognitive diversity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm guilty of this. When I've hired someone, I try and find a mini me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're going to be like me, and oh my god, they'll be
and
great.
I'm the best.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Guys, don't do that. Hiring managers, do not do that.
Absolutely.
Because it's a disaster waiting to happen. You need to push yourself you need to push your mind to hire differently, because they will come up with something different to you, what you will.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably the thing when you're further on in your career. We talk about like hiring, like applying for your skill set, but also knowing where your blind spots are. Like I know the things I'm not very good at. Luckily, I've built a team around me who are better at me than who can do that, and vice versa. You know, there's things that I can do that some of the other team can't. Yeah. Like, but that's the whole point. It's like, as you say, if we were all the same, it would be very dull. Yeah. And it would be we wouldn't move forward. We would just stay still.
Absolutely. This brings me to a diversity point. Because when I speak to hiring managers, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Liz, when I speak to hiring managers, they often say, find me an auditor. Right, okay, qualified or not? Yes, must be qualified. You're looking at a certain candidate pool. You're looking at a certain candidate pool that has gone to uni, done the ACA or ACCAs or CIAs, etc. Can't sponsor. Okay, then you're looking at those who have right to work.
Yeah.
You're looking at a candidate pool that is the same here.
Yeah.
How do we hit diversity with an agenda like that? And I get it. I completely get it from a hiring point of view. There needs to be some sort of, because you can't put them out on certain clients if they're not qualified. How do we do that? And that goes back to actually what you were saying earlier around the Reactivate program. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you know, for whatever reason, we've never struggled with the diversity point to that extent. But maybe because we have never hired for like, you have to go to a certain university or you have to have a certain like education profile. I think probably one thing RSM has done very well for a number of years is essentially blind recruitment. So we don't have any details about anyone, name, age, ethnicity, university, anything, which can sometimes be difficult because you have no idea who you're going to meet and you don't know what they look like or anything. But
they come to a face-to-face interview, exactly. It's completely different. That's not
or even during COVID, like we hired them blind and then like they turn up and like, oh hi. It was like, I don't know about you guys, but it was like, oh, you're much taller than I thought. You're much shorter. I got a lot like, you're a lot shorter than I thought. So
you're quite small.
Very small. Yeah, I had a client say that to me, like, oh, you're really small. So I think RSM said that very well. So we haven't necessarily had that diversity issue in terms of like we've had quite a variety of candidates and team members, but I do agree about certain people have a very narrow view about what educational background people should have done
or must come from a Big Four.
Exactly. And I see that more in industry, like must be Big Four qualified, and you're like, well, that doesn't mean anything, does it? Because no, it's disrespect to Big Four, but
Big Four is great, but you know, there's other firms who do amazing stuff out there.
But that, you know, at Big Four they might have worked on one particular industry or one particular type of client, and
they're specialised, aren't they?
Exactly, because they don't have the breadth of experience, or vice versa. Or if you're hiring, there may be anyway. So I think there's an element of snobbery. I think that's basically the point of it, isn't it? And as you say, there's a lot of people who like to hire in their own image or in their own kind of thing. I read something yesterday that said 20% of current Deloitte partners went to Oxford. Yeah. And so, you know, that's like a massive, like, I'm sure 20% of the population did not go to Oxford. Yes. And of course there was an argument for the brightest and the best, and I get that. But I think coming back to our earlier point, like, you know, I wouldn't have made the brightest and the best list. Because I took 2 years out, I went to a state school, but that's not to say I can't be successful as a partner or even not get to part, you know, I can't be successful in the business. So I think we need to get out of that idea that there's only one path to success. I think these days there are many paths.
I hate to say this, but I'm going to quote Jules. I'm pretty sure she said, I know, I might have to check this. But I'm pretty sure she was saying, actually, clients are saying, you know, we want a diverse pool. It is happening. You know, I'm not saying it's not happening. I think there can be a huge improvement area. But she is saying, you know, clients are saying, actually, it doesn't have to be Big Four profiles or, you know, top 10. There are some, you know, smaller firms, top 30, where people will give that external audit route a chance to get into internal audit. So it is changing, but I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think, you know, obviously it will be generational shifts, won't it? And I think, you know, and also what we are hiring. So I think also what has happened is over the last 20 years, let's say, you could hire the same sort of skill set over and over again. That was fine. Now we're moving into a world where analytics are king and data analysts, and actually what we require from the workforce of the future is completely different from what it has been potentially historically. Internal audit was kind of, you had to be a jack of all trades. You had to have good communication skills, good writing skills, and good analytical skills. That's quite a package that you have to go after. And also, you know, in internal audit, you're out talking to clients much sooner than you are in external audit. External audit for the first few years, you're not out without a supervisor or a manager. I hear lots of, I'm qualified, but I wasn't allowed to talk to a client. And you're like, oh my God, how did that happen?
Senior stakeholders.
Yeah, exactly. All of that stuff. Whereas in internal audit, obviously, you're essentially doing that from day one. So you kind of get that exposure. But I think, you know, what we will need from the workforce in terms of skill sets is changing, which I hope will encourage we're going to have to break down some of those barriers because we can't just keep recruiting from, as you say, an increasingly smaller pool. I also think there's a big challenge coming for professional services in terms of what the workforce want from. So it used to be training contract was like a sought after thing, right? People wanted that security for 3 to 5 years. They wanted to know the hierarchy. Now more and more we're getting, that's actually a really long time to commit. I don't want to stay in a job that long. I don't want to study for a professional qualification. I don't think it's necessary.
The motivations are completely different.
Really different.
And also that's a long time.
It's a really long time, especially in your early 21.
Exactly. It's a big commitment.
It's a huge commitment. And whereas people actively sought that out 10 years ago, that's not the case now. And so the pool of people that you were recruiting from is getting smaller and smaller because it's not actually that. So I think there will be something coming around the profession in terms of actually what does that training contract look like? Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that it's not necessarily going to be fit for purpose in a few years.
Absolutely. And I was talking to this about another partner, and I was saying, you know, the motivations for Gen Z are different. You know, I've spoken to Gen Zs myself, a lot of them, and they're, you know, that's a very long time span for them to commit to. You know, they want to go off traveling, or you know, they might not want to work. You know, I work ridiculous hours. That might not motivate. That motivates me because I'm like, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm getting out of this. You know, recruitment is a very, you know, whatever you put in or however.
It's quite transparent, isn't it? Like what you put in is what you get out. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that might not work for them.
100%.
That might not be what they want. But also, how as leaders, we spoke about this in the past as well, how do we as leaders understand how to motivate them? And we need to get that bit right, because I think
absolutely
they are, you know, I think Gen Zs, they're very open, they're very honest about what is driving them. But that's different to how we've ran things in the past. And I think businesses need to change. I think everyone that I'm talking to is trying to change or do something and listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, and you know, in many ways the pandemic was great for this, wasn't it? Because it was like a mini industrial revolution in like a matter of weeks. With the move to hybrid and remote and all of the options that brought up, but also a focus on employee engagement, well-being that wasn't historically there. So, but I think you're right in terms of, you know, and like I've got loads of contacts about like social media world or whatever, and you know, the pace in tech startup, you could go in, you know, have the same skill set. You might have traditionally gone into accountancy, and you can go into a tech startup now. And although those hours are brutal, by the way, it sounds like, if you think in professional services is hard, to try tech startups or recruitment, yeah, exactly. But it does give them, you know, like ever changing is, you know, the growth, the learning, you know, and it's an old adage, but I do think it's right. Jobs should either be something you can learn from, like you should be doing it for the learning experience, or you should be doing it for the earning experience. And ideally you find both, and that's great. But the idea of when you're ready to move on is when it's no longer serving either of those purposes for you. And I think, you know, there are so many ways that you can earn money these days which weren't available when I left school. Instagram as an example, but you could open up a TikTok shop. You could you know, launch an e-course. You could write a book. Like, you know, all of the barriers to entry have kind of been great. You know, talk about social mobility and diversity. Essentially, if you have a phone now, you can make money.
Do anything.
You can do anything and make money. And I think that's, I mean, really exciting. But I think coming back to risk averse, my concern is actually for firms, we end up with only recruiting from very risk averse pools because they don't want to take chances. But what that then means for the business is you've got a lot of very risk averse people who aren't going to necessarily grow the business as much as we have been able to, or compared to like comparator industries.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that's definitely a really important point to talk about as leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the future of the business? And like, what will our clients need from us, which is really important that we need to keep pace with, but equally what workforce do we need to be able to meet those needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different things coming out. I mean, jobs that we see now didn't exist 10 years ago. Absolutely. And that will be the case moving forward as well.
Absolutely. And that's why I say to, like, I've got nephews who are like 8 and 6 or whatever, and I'm like, the careers they're going to do don't exist
so
yet.
Different.
Like, we can't even and we talk about the university system, but equally our school education system needs an overhaul, because it's still based on a very Victorian reading, writing, arithmetic type model.
Yeah.
And actually what we need is people who can problem solve, people who can think out the box, and people who can communicate and go kind of full circle. This is why I think internal audit is such a great career, because it teaches you those skills.
Yeah.
And I don't know what my internal audit teams will even be doing in internal audit in 5 years, let alone where some of those people might go on who have just joined from university. They're going to be working for another 40 or 50 years. Like, the careers they're doing, like, literally none of us can conceive them. Yeah. But I think the grounding that the skill set gives you is just really transferable.
Yeah, really good point. Food for thought. For sure.
I mean, if I had all the answers, I'd be in a different room right now. I'm just raising questions at the moment, not really answering anything.
Just raising. Everyone can think about it and come up with some answers.
But I do think it's an exciting time for the industry. Yeah. I do think it's an exciting time for workforce. I think we just need to look at the upsides more than we're looking at the downsides.
Yeah, absolutely. Focus on the positives is how we evolve, isn't it? I'm going to take it back to you.
Okay.
My challenges. I love that. This is why you're on here. It's about you. Challenges. What challenge have you got? A pinnacle, like, have you got something that you really went through in your career to get to partner, or get to, not even necessarily partner, but like could have been along your journey to partner? Have you got a time where you really you're like, can't do this, or really struggled, or just...
I think there's definitely been times in my career where I felt like this isn't like for me anymore, like either individual roles or teams I'm working in or whatever. But I think the good thing is there's always been opportunities, and I think as long as you get someone who can see where the opportunities are, I think that will take you. And I think is that, so I am a partner, and obviously that is a large job and whatever, but I also have carved out other things that I do, so like YouTube and coaching and like I think more what I'm aiming for is to help people create the careers that they want. So soon we're talking about launching a Create Your Career community, which is about helping people kind of tackle all the things we've talked about today. So aimed really at people who perhaps are in the first few years of work, but either it's not quite meeting their expectations, they're not sure what's next, or what the opportunity, or there's all these great opportunities, like what do I go for? Because I think trying to navigate that path is really difficult. And as I say, not everyone knows straight out of university what they want to do for the rest of their careers. So I think having the platform that you have as a partner allows you to kind of raise some of these conversations that perhaps people who are in the thick of it can't advocate for themselves, or don't necessarily even know kind of conceptually how to do that. So I think definitely for me, so it's not a challenge, like everyone, it's how many hours are in the day and what you want to focus on, but I think I've reached a nice point of understanding where my skills are, where my strengths are, but really where my passions are and what I really want to be known for. And I think for me that is that, the kind of diversity and inclusion angle, but making it a better place for everyone. Yeah, absolutely. And just taking it back to coaching, I've had first-hand experience with you, haven't I, when I first became a director for IAC. And I must say, what I always say, this piece of advice, I was talking about you yesterday. I was talking about you to another partner and one of my colleagues, and I was saying one of the pieces that, one of the many tips you gave to me was when you go into a meeting, and it's, yes, if people don't know how to advocate for themselves or say that, and we can play that position, but also just because we're in we are in a senior leadership position doesn't mean we can always advocate for ourselves. Sometimes we need that someone to have our back. And what you said to me, you said if you go into that meeting, make sure you've got someone on side with you, because you need that sometimes, don't you? And that's one of the pieces of information I'll never forget that you gave to me. So by the way, guys, Liz is an amazing coach, and I'm sure you have such an effect on your team around you and just what you bring. So thank you. Yeah, I think like those are really good examples, aren't they? Like, no one taught me meeting craft. Like, I went as a bagman plenty of times. Where do you get that from? But where do you get that from? Yeah, exactly. How do you kind of understand? So actually, like, I'm writing a book at the moment. So I'm committing, I'm putting this out there. I'm going to write a chapter a week each on LinkedIn each week. And then at the end of the year, I'm going to hopefully publish the book. Good. I want the first signed copy. I was here first. Of course, you can. I will absolutely do that. I'm putting it out there. But that is all about all of these tips that like I have worked out through the years, because actually, if I'm being honest, I've never worked for a female partner. Like I've never had a female manager. Like I've only ever been managed by men because of like the timing of my career and stuff. And so, but it's all these things you don't kind of really understand. And again, like doing the masters and stuff, it was like loads of research I was finding, which was like, women are 3 times more likely to get interrupted in a meeting. Women are 3 times more likely to get spoken over. Then we have the whole like mansplaining, heap eating, people stealing your ideas, all of this stuff. And so I started to just kind of build up a toolkit of things that I kind of either noticed and observed or like read about, which were like important. And even, you know, a lot of the stuff comes from like the Obama administration and you know, the first administration versus the second, the amount of women that were in it. And that was because they took active steps to encourage female participation. But simple things like at meetings, you know, it was like I mean, I once went to a meeting where I was asked not to sit at the table but to sit behind. And again, this might be quite common when you're early on in your career, depending on very formal meetings can be like that, board meetings, and this happened in the Obama administration. And so women were asked to kind of, because they were in slightly more junior roles, to sit outside, but the men would often sit at the table. So they formed a strategy which was like every time a woman spoke, another woman backed her up to amplify the voices, and you need the support. And so that was like basically the conversation we had, wasn't it? It was I think often as women we think we can't ask for help, or we don't want to ask for help, or we're not sure, and we don't naturally have the networks, the rugby clubs, the cricket clubs, the private school background. We don't have that natural club room environment, and so we have to make it. But the great thing about women is we are often better at collaboration, we are better at teamwork, we are better at building consensus. So let's leverage our skills. And as you say, if you know you've got something to land in a difficult meeting, sound someone in. And it doesn't have to be another woman. I've done it plenty of times with men who I knew would back me, or who are quite happy to back me, but it wouldn't occur to do it for them to do it in that situation. Whereas I've been like, actually I need your help on this, and then like more like I've never been turned down, like it's never gone badly from that conversation.
It's so true. I think the bit that I gave a weird face, you're probably going to see it on camera, when you said, you know, you're sort of made to sit, you know, behind. That's never happened to me, because I've got genuinely a really good boss, Dave, who facilitates conversations, who does encourage you to say that. So to me it's almost bizarre, but I've been in different situations where I'm like, okay, I can relate to that. You know, I was on a tube yesterday, I wanted to kick myself yesterday, so I was on the tube, I wasn't being noisy or anything, nor was it a quiet tube where you can't be on the phone. And this man said to me, oh, can you take your call elsewhere, you're being a bit noisy. And I just said yes, and I walked off. Now soon as I did that, I was like, why did I do that? I could have just said, this isn't quite, but it's things like that where you're like, I should have said something.
You should have, but we're taught, like, for many good reasons, not to basically not to get into a confrontation.
I'm probably too much of a goody two shoes that won't do that anyway.
Absolutely. So there's something called good girl syndrome, which is like a lot of has been raised at. So again, research shows us that throughout school, and this is true. Obviously, boys tend to emotionally mature at a slower rate than girls. So girls tend to be more emotionally mature at key ages throughout your school career. And that teaches girls 2 things. Firstly, that we get praised for being quiet, completing our work, essentially being a good girl. Like that's what girls get praised at. Boys learn that it's okay to get criticised because they are told off more often. There's more rough.
They're a bit more naughty.
more naughty, aren't they? Rough and tumble. And also because they often play more sport, they're more used to losing. So for women to put themselves out there and then for it to have a bad reaction, like they didn't get the job or like there was an argument in that situation, is felt a lot more by females than it would be by a male in exactly the same situation. Again, mass generalisations. But the point is, we have different resilience things. And actually for a woman to put herself out there is a much bigger deal for all of the reasons we've talked about. So I'd say any male listeners who are listening to this is when your female colleagues put themselves out there, make an effort to back them.
Really.
Obviously, unless they're like completely wrong, which is fine. But you know,
if they're wrong, they're wrong.
They're wrong. That's fine.
But
it doesn't happen often, but occasionally they are. But yeah, look at that support. And I think a lot of the things that I talk about, like on the channel and hopefully in the book, are about allyship. And actually, it is creating your allies, it's relying on them, and actually men have such a big role to play in that. that's really kind of, I guess, the ask from them is like, it isn't chivalry and it isn't being patronising, but if you're asked for help, then like help.
I guess some men might feel, oh, maybe if I do support, she might not want that. Sometimes, I wonder what it is as well.
And I think a lot of the male colleagues I talk to, they genuinely want to help, but they don't know how. Like, they don't know what the right thing is, and they don't want to come across as kind of patronising or any of those other things. So I think but again, that's a process of education, isn't it? So I think when the process of the conversation we had a couple of years ago was just I basically asked for some help, and you'll be surprised at how well that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes they just need to be told, right? Help me. A bit like my husband. Can you please help me?
Exactly. I always say my husband doesn't need a wife, he just needs a PA, but it's like the same kind of thing. Like, he just needs quite direct instructions about what I need from him. So.
Yeah, absolutely. What tips, if someone wants to make partner, genuinely, if they've committed to, right, I want to make partner here, what tips would you give to them?
So I think probably not dissimilar from stuff we talked about. So I think back yourself. So firstly, articulate that as a desire. Don't be afraid to put that out there. And understand from the people around you what you need to do. Is it billings? Is it behaviours? What do they need to see from? Is it new business? Is it building a team? Like, what do they specifically need to see from you? Because not all partners do the same things, and not all partners have the same skills. So what do they need for your bit of the business for that to be a thing? Then also be prepared that it is quite a lengthy process. So I'm trying to think when I went on.
It's a whole process.
It's a whole process. It takes several years. So be prepared for the long run. I think often it's easy to get disheartened of like, oh, it didn't happen this year. Like, oh, it didn't happen. Or, oh my God, it's 3 years away, whatever. One of my best friends has a saying, which is like, time will pass anyway. So you might as well be working towards it. That's a bit like why I did my master's, because I was like, well, the time's going to pass anyway, isn't it? Like, everyone's like, oh my God, 2 years. How are you going to do that? So I think that. But also don't think you have to fit a cookie cutter mold to be a partner. Look at your own strengths, look at what you can bring, look at what your diversity might be, your difference, and use that as your superpower. Don't think that you have to be exactly like the person next to you or not. Particularly at RSM, they're looking for leaders, they're looking for people who can lead other people. And they want people who are confident in their own abilities. But equally, people who can go, that's not my skill set, I shouldn't take that on, that's not for me. They don't just want people who are like chasing the figures all the time. So I think understand what your firm, or wherever you are, understand what that needs from you, and then also how you can best get there.
Really, really good point. I love the cookie cutter.
It's
analogy.
not homogenous.
And also I think, look, I've been in this industry for 8 years. Lots of learning every day, just learning off a point you made. It's interesting because you think every partner does do the same thing. You're right, they don't. And it's, you probably, if you are junior to that, you probably think, oh, they must do all the same thing, their job must be the same. It's not.
Absolutely not. So, like some partners will just focus on business development, like don't actually have any client work at all, and are just there to raise the profile of the firm or the team or whatever. You have other partners who are almost the other way and completely focused on client delivery and don't actually win new work that much themselves, rely on others to do that, or have different funnels to do that. You have some people who are really focused on teams and team development, some people who are really focused less on their own portfolios, more on bringing in other service lines. So basically you can make the job what you want it to be, you can make the role what you want it to be, but that's why you need to know what your skill set is.
I think that's really interesting because our listeners may not necessarily know that.
And that's before we talk about technical partners who just do technical accounting or whatever, people who do lots of different things. So, there is no one job, even within internal audit, within RSM. Lots of partners do lots of different things in lots of different ways.
Really informative. I feel like I learned something there.
Good. I mean, yes. So, a partner is just a level, it is a status, but it is not the job.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about, you referred to superpower. You've said that quite. What's your superpower?
So I like to build community, not empire. So
I love that.
Liz. So and often in firms you will find empire builders who are just there to bill as much as they can and build their empires, which is absolutely fine. I'm here to build community and consensus. So my superpower is being able to put people together, but also to teach people to back themselves and to unlock their own confidence. So I think that's what I really bring to the table.
I love that. Liz, I'm so excited about your book.
Thank
genuinely,
you.
Obviously, because I'm getting the first copy. I'm joking.
Obviously.
Obviously. But I'm so excited to read that because I think leaders, they're forever evolving. Businesses are forever evolving. I think there's never a time where you should stop learning. I was literally just saying that to someone else, actually. So yeah, I think everyone should watch out for that book. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you.
I'll keep an eye out on your LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing.
It's been fantastic, and yeah, love to talk about all things diversity and inclusion, whatever. But genuinely, it's a really exciting time for the profession. I think.
Brilliant.
It'll be
Yeah,
good.
it is. Thank you so much, and thank you to our listeners.